Welcome back to our third day of all of these factoring methods. Today's special factoring method is factoring the sums and differences of cubes. Okay, now, the unfortunate side to this one is not only do you have to be able to recognize the process, you do actually have to memorize these formulas. Okay? So that's one downside. However, the bright side is they're essentially the same formula, okay? Just notice what happens with your signs, okay? So your signs flip depending on if you're adding versus if you're subtracting. And this is another one of those times that unfortunately just practice is the best way to remember the structure of those formulas. Okay, which is why we're separating this out, taking a whole day just for this factor method. Because once you learn how to use the formulas, I don't think it's a difficult method. It's just learning using the formulas. So some of the differences of cubes. How you know to use this is pretty much what the name implies. When you're either adding or subtracting two cubes, which is kind of like the difference of squares. Okay? So cubes. 1 times 1 times 1, 2 times 2 times 2, 3 times 3 times 3, 4 times 4 times 4, 5 times 5 times 5, and I'm not going to get any more cruel than that, okay? Those are basically the 5 cubes that I need you to know. All right, so this is 1 cubed, 2 cubed, 3 cubed, 4 cubed, and 5 cubed. So it just means that number multiplied by itself 3 times. Okay? So when you're adding and subtracting those, that is when you can use these formulas. So the first thing before you use the formula, what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify, all right, here is x cubed and 27 is 3 cubed. So when I'm starting my problems, I always show that, okay? I always show breaking it down into what is getting cubed. The reason that I do that is because this right here, that's my A in the formula, and then this right here is going to be my B in that formula. So that's kind of the nice thing is when you break it down, now it's just kind of plug and chug from there. So I notice that I'm adding, so that's telling me I'm going to use the top one. Okay? Once I've identified all of that, now let's put everything into the formula. A plus B. Well, my A is x and my B is 3. A squared is just going to give me x squared minus A times B, so x times 3 is 3x, plus B squared. 3 squared gives me 9. So that's the gist of using that formula, okay? Once you break down A and B, I think the construct is pretty simple. It's pretty basic. So this piece obviously gives me a negative 3. This piece, however, when we're left with something that looks like that, now we run into the trouble that we're never actually going to be able to factor that, okay? Just by nature, you're never going to be able to. So my hint for you that I put right here, you always get imaginary answers when you use the quadratic formula. For this piece, you always, always, always end up using the quadratic formula. So if you need to remember the quadratic formula, here it is. That is going to be very important today, because whenever you're left with that quadratic piece, that is your go-to spot. the quadratic formula. So let's go through and do that. Now here, I need to make sure you don't misinterpret. These are not the a and b in the quadratic formula. The a and b for the quadratic formula come from here now. Okay, so that's one thing. Don't let yourself get lost in that. When I transition and now I'm doing quadratic formula, make sure you're only focusing on the quadratic piece. Okay, so x equals negative b. Well, here, if on the quadratic is negative 3, the opposite of that is positive 3, plus or minus b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So I set up my quadratic formula. And now remember, the way that I simplify is I always simplify this inner piece first. Okay? Get me just a single number in there. And remember, you can just type that into your calculator. So negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9. Just type that into the calculator for me. And that gives you negative 27. Now, hopefully, it makes sense to you that you get a negative number when you do that. Because remember, I told you, you will always get imaginary solutions. So for that to be true, you'd have to be getting a negative in there. So again, hopefully, that makes sense. Now, unfortunately, that's still not quite the end of our story here. Okay? Because now this radical can still break down. Okay, because 27, well, you're going to have the I that pulls out, but then 27 breaks up into 9 and 3. So there, I took care of the negative right away, just called it I, and then I broke down that 27 into 9 and 3. And again, why did I break it down into the 9 and 3? Well, I did that because the square root of 9 is just 3. So that is going to be your other two answers. All right, so the complete answer is you need this piece and this piece. Those are the three solutions to the quadratic. So let's go back. Let's do another example. Here, let's start at the very top, so right there. All right, so again, to get started, I'm going to identify this is x cubed minus 2 cubed. Because 8 is 2 cubed. So what that means is this time I have a negative here. So that means I'm going to use the bottom formula. So first, let's just get down that art of breaking it down. Okay, so here this is going to be my A in the formula. That's going to be my B. So A minus B, x minus 2, x, or a squared, which is going to be x squared, plus ab, so plus 2 times x, plus b squared, which is going to be 4. Because b is 2, and x, or an a is x. So once I break that down, now this piece always gives me my easy answer, okay? My x being 2. This piece is what gives me the quadratic that I'm now going to have to solve. So I'll move it so you can still see the quadratic formula. So remember now for the quadratic formula, my a is 1, b is 2, c is 4. Okay? So make sure for the quadratic formula piece, you're using the a, b, and c from the quadratic. And let's get that set up. Negative b, so negative 2 plus or minus b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. And as always, I told you, simplify this piece first. 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 4. If you type that into your calculator, that should become a negative 12. And hopefully it makes sense to you that that is a negative number, because that's the only way you're going to get imaginary solutions out of this. So now that we're this far, now we have to simplify this piece right here. All right, so let's break it down. That 12, oh, I'm sorry. 12, I'm going to pull out the I right away, just so I don't have to deal with it later. But 12 breaks down into 4 and 3. And the reason I'm pulling out 4 is because it is a perfect square. The square root of 4 is 2. All right, and now what I'm going to notice is each of these pieces is divisible by 2. So I can actually simplify this a little bit more and just call this negative 1 plus or minus I square roots of 3. I can do away with those 2's. I can divide those 2's. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1, and then 2 divided by 2 is positive 1, so I'm just left with the I square roots of 3. All right. So, and just to reemphasize, that means my 3 solutions, one of them comes from that, 2 of them come from this because of that plus or minus. That gives me my full 3 solutions. All right, so let's keep moving forward. Let's look at this one. So, to solve this one, okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write this. 8x cubed is going to be 2x cubed. And 1 is simply 1 cubed. So I'm always going to write out the pieces like that. So I can easily identify that is my A, and that is my B. I use the subtraction to tell me which equation to use. All right, so my A is 2x, B is 1. That negative is telling me to use that bottom of the 2 equations. So now let's get this all set up. So I'm going to do it over here to conserve my space. So A, which is 2x, minus B, then A squared, well 2x squared is 4x squared, plus A times B, 2x times 1 is just 2x, plus B squared, well 1 squared is just 1. And it leaves me with that. And now I have to solve each piece. Now here, even this piece is a little bit more complicated now. Okay, so I'm going to need you to actually write out adding the 1 and dividing by 2. And you'll get that. And as always, that right there is going to need the quadratic formula. A, B, C. So negative B plus or minus B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. I'm going to want to simplify that piece in there. So what I end up getting is negative 2 plus or minus square root of, let's see here, that will give me a negative 12 over 8. Then unfortunately, whenever you do this, that piece is always going to simplify. So what that means is now I have to break apart that 12. I'm going to pull out the imaginary piece right away because I know it's always going to be imaginary. 12 can break up into 4 and 3. Remember, you always pull out a perfect square. So square root of 4 is 2, so I get 2i square roots of 3 all over 8. This time, notice my coefficients are 2, 2, and 8. All right? So what that means is I can take a 2 out of everything to simplify this. But it still leaves me a fraction because when I take a 2 out of the bottom, I'm still left with 4. Okay? And that is how this one is going to simplify. So again, here, my 3 answers. One of them comes from here. The other 2 come from there. So I realize that this is quite a bit of work and is going to take quite a bit of practice, which is why I'm making sure to separate this out to give you a whole day to practice just this skill. All right? However, I do want you to remember our previous 2 methods. Okay? Because it is going to be really important that you know when to use each method for your test. So when you have 3 things and each of them have an x in it, that goes back to our 5.3a day, okay? Where you pull out the x and now that lets you factor. So this time you'll get 4 and 6. That gives you your 3 solutions of 0, negative 4, and negative 6. Then remember the previous one, 5.3b. When you have 4 terms and you're dealing with a cubic, that is factoring by grouping. So I factor out of each parenthesis, so x plus 7, because I can pull out the x squared. Here I can pull out a 2, and I get x plus 7 again. And remember, the awesome thing is you're always looking for that same parenthesis. So you can bring together that common parenthesis, your leftovers, that is going to be your easy piece. This one, thankfully, we don't have to use quadratic formula on. We can solve by square rooting, but it is going to be important that you set it equal to 0. So you recognize that when you're square rooting the negative, that you're getting the imaginary piece. So plus or minus, that is an imaginary square roots of 2. And that's going to represent your other 2 solutions. Wow. All right, so please, please, please don't feel overwhelmed by this. We are going to take time to practice. I'll go through more in class. However, do make sure that you at least have an idea how to set out that equation. Then we'll take some time in class to make sure we're investigating further, that you understand fully how to get to the answers. All right, and tell the difference between them. So in the summary, I think this time, because it's getting more complicated, what I want you to write in your summary is something that you need me to clarify tomorrow, okay? Because I know this section starts to overwhelm students when we get here. So I want you to write a question you have for me, something you want me to clarify, so you'll be more successful when you're doing your practice work. And then come back with this video watched with those questions in mind and ready to do your practice work for me.